Every striving organism exists within an ecosystem to maximize their possibilities and also survive. The same thing too with bad people. For a bad person to maximize the badness in them, they need to exist within an ecosystem that will encourage the ability they have in them. And this is why you find a bad person keeping bad friends, having to stay in certain locations that will encourage that character they have, or having to go to certain locations every time that will encourage that character they have. They just surround themselves with certain things. You just know that this person only wants to remain bad. That's because for anything to maximize its potential, it needs to exist within the ecosystem that supports that potential in them. So I wonder why you as a believer would think you can be a good believer on your own. They talk about church, you say it's not by church. They talk about prayer, you say it's not by prayer. They talk about Bible study, you say it's not by Bible study. They talk about marrying a godly person, you say by marrying godly person. How do you think you will survive without putting yourself within the divine ecosystem of God? And this is why many of us who are believers still struggle with certain things, and we are wondering why. And now we are feeling ourselves grace, God doesn't judge. You see, be real with yourself. The reason why you have not yet found it easy to overcome is because you have not placed yourself within the ecosystem of a believer. And what is within the ecosystem of a believer? Number one, you find prayer. Any believer who desires to manifest the best of God in them and keep growing, that believer must initiate prayer into his ecosystem. Acts chapter 6 from verse 3 to 4. This is Peter speaking. He said, find 7 people that will do this serving of food that is distracting us, so that we can return back to the ministry of prayer and the word. They understood that if they would need to sustain the capacity God has given them in their ecosystem, prayer cannot be separated. Bible study cannot be separated. Another thing again is fasting. Okay, you will fast, because one of the ways we deal with this flesh is through fasting. In fact, we're not really called to fast because we want to defeat demons in deliverance and all of that. No, we are basically called to fast to subject our body to the control of God, to the control of the Spirit. And so the Pharisees came to Jesus in the book of Matthew chapter 9 from verse 14 to 15. And they said to Jesus, we, the Pharisees, the followers of the law, we fast. But why is it your disciples don't fast? And Jesus did not say, it doesn't matter, in grace, fasting is not necessary. No, that's not what he said. Jesus said to them, it is because I am still around. When I leave, then they will see the need to fast. Because fasting is very necessary within the ecosystem of God that a believer exists in. If it wasn't necessary, Jesus wouldn't have started his ministry by fasting. So he said to the Pharisees, these ones will begin to fast when I leave. And even when they were unable to cast out a demon, Jesus said this kind can only go out by prayer and fasting. Of course, he wasn't even talking about the demon. He was talking about their faith, that this kind of unbelief that made it impossible for you to cast out this demon can only live by prayer and fasting. Another thing that is within the ecosystem of a believer is fellowship. How can you say church is not necessary? How can you say it's not by going to church? The Bible says in the book of Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25, it says, do not neglect the fellowship or the gathering of brethren, for with this we encourage one another, especially now that the coming of the Lord is near. So how can you say fellowship, going to church, is not necessary? Then who do you communicate with? Who do you share your faith with? Who do you lay your burdens upon, and whose burden are you carrying? You can't do it on your own. You can't do it in isolation. Even Jesus needed 12 to do his ministry. So why do you think you are that strong to exist in your own? The Bible says iron sharpeneth iron, and we learn from one another. We carry each other's burden together. We intercede for one another. We share our pains, and we communicate the part of God's wisdom that has been given to us to each other. Fellowship is a must within the ecosystem of a believer. Acts 2:46 to 47 says, the disciples continued in fellowship. They broke bread, shared everything with one another, encouraged one another, and the Bible says God added to their number. You will meet like-minded people on the way, and you must attach yourself to them. That is the right one anyway. And even when your journey with one ends, you will still meet others that you will still have to attach your faith to, because we are not called to do this thing alone. Another thing again within the ecosystem of a believer is your calling. Nobody is just called to be a Christian to just stay. You are given an assignment. That's what the Bible calls us co-laborers. He calls us soldiers, because we have an assignment, we have a job. And so Peter would put it this way: be diligent to make or to know what your election is, or what your calling is. He said, by this way you will not fall. You will not fall. You will not be distracted. You will not be found doing useless things, because you will be at the point of your calling. So within the ecosystem of a believer, it is important to know that there is a calling for you. There is a mission given to you. It doesn't matter how young or how old you are, there is a purpose for your existence. And the moment you come into the ecosystem of God, you will find that calling, and you are supposed to be about that calling. As Jesus said, why are you looking for me? Don't you know that I am about my Father's business? And Jesus also went on to tell his disciples, my meat, my food is to do the Father's will. So we too, our meat, our food is to do the Father's will. And we shouldn't be found in everywhere. We should be found where God has assigned us to be. Any believer that does not find himself doing these things, one thing is sure: he is beginning to drift away from the presence of God.